kicking us off the day is Dave Moskovitz.
Let's get my little timer here going so I don't use up too much precious time. So thank you very much, Laura. I just want to put in an additional plug for Lightning Lab. I'm a bit of a Lightning Lab junkie. I was one of the founding investors in the both Wellington Lightning Labs, and I also spent a good part of the latter half of this year working down in Christchurch at the Lightning Lab down there. It's just the most brilliant environment if you want to focus on your startup, disable all other interruptions, and really make a lot of progress in what you want to do. There's nothing like Lightning Lab where you'll get bombarded with mentors, compressed with all sorts of pressure that you never imagined possible, connected to unimaginable networks worldwide. It really is, that little pressure chamber with lightning bolts coming out of it for startups. So I highly recommend applying to XX if you are eligible to do that. So the title of my talk right now is going to be what you'll need to do to convince me to invest in your startup. I am a professional startup investor and company director. I've got about a dozen investments out there in play at the moment. Some of them are doing fantastically. Others are sort of meh, and there are a few in between as well. So I've seen quite a lot of opportunities over the years since I've been doing this for the last 13 years or so. So what I'm going to take you through is how an investor thinks. When you have your own startup opportunity and you want to put it in front of someone, what are they thinking? What are they looking for? And how should you tweak your pitch to actually answer some of the questions that an investor might have? So my name is Dave Moskovitz. I'm easily discoverable online. I feel a bit bad about having that first name, Dave, because I read a statistic the other day that for NZX companies, there are more directors named Dave than there are females. So all I can say is I didn't choose the name, and I didn't choose my gender either, but that's something that I think a lot of us want to do something about. And so do come along to XX if you qualify, and we'll see where we can go with that. So, but first, I've got my own payload. I'm one of the founders of Startup New Zealand, which is an organization that runs startup weekends all over the country. We just had our first national summit about a month ago, where we had 30 people gather from everywhere, from Whangarei to Invercargill. And what we want to be is the fabric which connects entrepreneurs to the resources that they need, both within their own community, but also nationally and internationally. So we're just getting off the ground. 2016 is going to be a big year for us because we've just been granted the license to run the Global Entrepreneurship Network and a Global Entrepreneurship Week in New Zealand. And in the third week of November, we want to run thousands of events around the country, and we hope some of you guys will be participating in those. Another plug, I run a blog called Startup of the Week, SOTW.NZ, Startup of the Week, and I'd like to have your name here. I'd love to do blog entries about your startups. So if you think that you have a startup that is worthy of being featured as Startup of the Week, go to the site, click on the Apply button, and fill in a really short form. There are 4 questions. And if it's interesting enough to me, I'll get back to you and hopefully do an entry on you. But what I'm trying to do is unearth all of those amazing startups that are out there that nobody's ever heard about, because there are lots of them. There was a time about 3 years ago when I thought that I knew about every startup that was happening in Wellington. But about 3 years ago, that sort of started changing dramatically. And now I'm lucky if I think I know of about 1/10 of the startups that are happening here in Wellington. So the whole scene has mushroomed, and that's really fantastic. It does create a problem for investors, though, in that we probably have more choice of stuff to invest in than there is in investment capital. But I'll talk about that in a bit. But anyway, if you think you could be Startup of the Week, let me know, and I'll see what I can do about featuring you. So what I'm going to talk about in the next 15 minutes or so is what we look for as investors in our startups. And this is my shopping list here. I'll go through them one by one. But by far the most important thing really is you, the chief exec, and your team. So when you're entering Lightning Lab, they have 5 criteria for coming into the lab. And those 5 criteria are team, market, and product. So what you're actually doing is down at the bottom of the list. We're much more interested in the people that are doing the doing, the team that is executing, and their experience and their credentials and, and their vision and their passion particularly. And then the market that you're in, is it growing? Is it shrinking? Is it big? Is it small? Is it international? Is it just in your suburb? What does the market look like? And then the product, because out of all of the things that you're working on, the product is the thing that's going to change the most over time. The team that you're coming into the lab with is really important because those are the people that are going to be executing. The market and the problem you're trying to solve are really, really important, but the product that you have is likely to change a lot. So team, market, product. And at the center of the team is you, the chief exec. So what are we looking for? The most important thing that an investor wants to know is, are you honest and trustworthy? When you come along to a board meeting post-investment, are you going to be telling porkies? Are you going to be exaggerating how wonderful things are going? And then all of a sudden one day you find out as an investor and as a board member that things are not really quite so rosy. And really, investors, as part of their due diligence process, will do quite a lot of reference checking about the people. And if we figure that, that you're basically a bullshit artist or an extreme exaggerator, it's going to be a really big turnoff for us. And if we find out that you've, say, been convicted of a dishonesty crime, I mean, that's going to be a showstopper. So honest and trustworthy is really important. No distractions. What else are you working on at the moment? I was involved in a startup and in an investment opportunity a few months ago, and then blow me down, I read in stuff that there's an article about this chief exec of a different company, and it turns out to be the same guy as the chief exec of this company that appeared at Angel HQ, and I was thinking, what's going on here? It's pretty hard to run two companies at the same time. As a startup founder, you're going to be working on this 168 hours a week, and you would work on it more if there were more hours in a week than that. But, it's really an all-consuming thing. So as an investor, we want to know that you don't have any other distractions. Domain experience, do you understand the ins and outs of the area that you're working with? Is this something you grew up with or something that you've had years of work experience in? Or have you come across this just on a whim and said, oh, I want to build a rocket ship to the moon, but I don't have any experience in astronautical engineering? Because we get startup founders who have these crazy ideas about industries that they know nothing about. And every once in a while, that's really good because you don't know the rules that you're breaking in order to be successful. But most of the time, industry experience really helps a lot. Really critical thing is that you're able to sell. Many startup founders are techs like me. I'm a programmer by trade, and we love nothing better than to sit in front of a computer screen at 2 a.m. in a darkened room and be at once in that flow state with whatever script we're writing. But it's really important as a founder that you can go out and sell, because you don't really know what you're supposed to be doing as a startup until you can sell it. If you can't sell an idea to someone, then there's no point in building a product to actually execute on that idea. So until you establish what the market pain is and how to sell that to somebody, there's no point in building too much by way of product or go any further than a minimum viable product. So as a founder, people are always going to want to talk to you, the potential buyers, about what your product does. And so you really do need to be able to sell. Are you ready to grow the big vision? Do you have a big enough vision? Are you coachable? When you come to a board meeting and we give you a bunch of advice, are you just going to blow us off, or are you actually going to try some things out? How pragmatic are you? Are you a dreamer? Will you settle for nothing less than perfection? Because, startups are just a constant series of trade-offs and near-death experiences. And unless you're pragmatic about how you're doing things, you're likely to fail. And this last one. Do you know that you may not be the final chief exec of your own company? I mean, the way things work out is that startup chief execs are really good at building startups. And that's one phase of a company's life, is starting something, getting to product market fit, selling that initial product to people, and then the next phase is expanding and commercializing that and growing it out internationally. And that requires a completely different set of skills. And then there's a third phase. Once you get to the end of that you're running a stable, big company, and you may have, 8 or 9 direct reports to you and 10,000 people reporting to you, again, that requires a completely different set of skills. It's very rare to find one person who can do all of those things. And so As a chief exec, do you know that that may not be you in the end? Are you willing, if there's somebody better that may be able to grow the company better than you at one of those stages, are you ready to step back? So often people are not willing to let go of their own babies. And as an investor, it's important to know that the person who's leading it is going to be able to do that. Your team. And team. You need to have a team that can basically iterate really quickly, turn on a sixpence, do lots of different things, not argue about who's going to do what. Everybody pitches in, have lots of different talents, but especially are fast learners, because you never know what's going to be coming at you in a startup. And where you start in a startup is definitely not where you end. And so the sorts of skills that you need to be able to pick up along the way are very different, and they're going to stretch you in all sorts of directions. If you have a specialist in one really narrow area, that may be really useful at one stage in your startup. But really, you need to have T-shaped people. Have very broad generalist skills and very deep specialist skills in one or two areas. So those are the people that we're looking for to fill in a startup team. Have you done amazing things? Most people who run startups have actually done pretty amazing other things in their lives. And I'm always interested to hear about those. But if you're capable of achieving greatness, chances are before you decided to do your startup, you've actually done some other really interesting things in life. You need to be fearless. Paul Graham describes running a startup as waking up every morning and getting punched in the face, which he then compares to working at a corporate as being waterboarded. But can you cope with being punched in the face every morning? Are you fearless? Are you resilient? Are you ready to get up and go at it again, no matter what the cost personally? Your team needs to be cohesive. If you're bickering all the time, then that's going to be a big impediment to progress. Do you have international networks? We're on a tiny island here, 4.5 million people. The world out there has 7 or 8 billion people. It's a much, much bigger place. Any international exposure, experience, or networks that you have are a big plus in terms of getting investors interested. Because if you try to do everything from New Zealand, from a New Zealand perspective, you're the lovely boy from Eketahuna and you're an expert in all things Wairarapa, that's really not going to help you when you want to expand way beyond that. Do you have a succession plan or a growth plan for your team? These are really important attributes that we'll be looking at when we're evaluating the investment opportunity. In terms of your market, the most critical thing is, for me anyway, not for everyone, but for me, is that you're after an international market. As I said, with only 4.5 million people here, it's really easy to achieve market saturation. And unless you're Trade Me and can get a really strong early adopter foothold on the market really early on, it's going to be pretty difficult for you to make a significant amount of money and attract a significant number of customers onto your platform only in New Zealand. And so people say, oh, well, after we go to Wellington, we'll go to Auckland, and after Auckland, we might go to Sydney. Like, well, Australia is really only a big New Zealand in many ways. I mean, it's only 20 million people in Australia, and compared to 4.5 million here, so it's not that exciting. By international, I mean you've got connections or aspirations to enter the market in the US, or in Europe, or in Asia, or in some place that's several orders of magnitude bigger than New Zealand. It's good to know that your market is growing. I mean, there are revenue opportunities in shrinking markets, but if you're getting involved in a growing market, then chances are that that tide that is floating all boats is actually going to float yours as well. So that's a risk reducer if you're in a growing market. If that market is active, that's really good. There's lots of stuff happening. You may have some competition. That's just validation that there's a place for you as well. Distribution is absolutely critical, and it's where many New Zealand companies fall down. Once you have your product, how are you actually going to get it out in front of people? Being able to distribute it internationally is so critical. In New Zealand, you can ring up anybody. You can ring up the chief exec of Fonterra and have a meeting with them next Tuesday. It's not hard to do. But the rest of the world does not work like that. The rest of the world doesn't work like that, and you need to have, channel partners, a reseller network, some way to get your product or your service in front of other people who are going to help you sell that in market and distribute it. For me as an investor, it's really convenient if I can understand your market. Some markets are pretty complicated. Some markets are really niche. So again, if you can find an easy way to get your investors to understand your market, it removes one impediment to them investing. So your startup needs to solve an identifiable pain. We all say, love your problem. What is the problem that you're solving? Often people come to investors and say, well, I've got this really cool piece of technology. Say, well, what problem does it solve? Oh, it solves some problem that's really hard to define. We get this at Startup Weekend all the time, actually. The problems that people solve at Startup Weekends are typically things like, I'm bored, I've got a new game, and this is something that people can do. I'm hungry, food delivery services. I'm horny, competitors to Tinder, and so on. So, but, you need to find an identifiable market pain that's actually worth solving to the extent that you can, that this problem is of value to somebody to solve, and that you can capture some of that value along the way. Your startup should have some sort of big, gutsy vision, and I guess one of my favorite ones is a startup that I'm chairman of, Publons. Our mission is to speed up science. That's what we want to do. That's our vision. We're going to speed up science through the power of peer review. And everything we do, we evaluate against that. We say, okay, is this feature actually going to help speed up science in some way? And having that really big overarching vision, a big, really hairy problem that you want to solve, is actually quite attractive to people like me. Not to everybody, but if you have that vision and you're doing something, not because you want to get rich or be successful or in a BMW or whatever, but because you're trying to solve a significant problem in the world, then there's got to be value in that, and that value should be capturable in some way. If your product or service is really cool, that's a big plus, but people do invest in boring stuff as well. That's good money spinner. You need to be capable of massive scale. Investors want to get typically a 30x return on investment on their investment. So, if I invest $10,000 in your startup, I want to see that turn into $300,000 in the next 5 to 10 years. And I know you're thinking, wow, that's really greedy. Why do you need to get a 30x return? Well, the answer is that, out of every 10 investments that a startup investor makes, probably only one of them is actually going to achieve that 30x return. Maybe a couple of them will give you your money back, and the other, 6 or 7 of them will die, and you'll get nothing from them. So if you take that 30x, spread it over 10 investments, that's only 3x, and then you say, well, okay, that's going to be like a 10-year investment cycle. Now you're competing with bank interest rates, which is why we're sort of looking for any of the startups that we invest in to be capable of generating a 30x return, which means that startups really need to be capable of massive scale, because in order to build your company to 30 times the value that it was when you started, you really need to be able to scale massively. IP is sort of a dirty word where I come from. Typically people think patents. I hate patents, trademarks, that sort of stuff. Intellectual property could be what you're doing, which is sitting in a black box on an AWS server somewhere that nobody has access to. So just because we say intellectual property doesn't necessarily mean patents and trademarks. It could be a way that you're doing something that's really clever and that's really hard for somebody else to replicate. We want to see corporate hygiene, that you've kept records, you keep your accounts up to date, you've paid taxes, that the tax people aren't going to come after you, you don't have any lawsuits against you. That's pretty much showstoppers for investments, so it's important to see that. And you need to remember that your business is a business and not a product. And when you're selling yourself to investors, what you should be selling them is not the fantastic product that you produced, but the business. How is this business going to make money? How is it going to grow? How is your customer base going to grow? Oh, and by the way, this is all enabled by this really cool product that we have. But it's not the product. We get a lot of product pitches dressed as investment pitches, and it's kind of disappointing because it leads to a lot of questions afterwards, which are important to answer. But most importantly for me, it has to make me say, hell yes. I call that the Derek Sivers test. Anybody know Derek Sivers? He spoke here last week, but he wrote in his book about the hell yes test, which is, things that don't make you say hell yes are probably not worth doing. And if your own startup doesn't make you say hell yes, then you should probably be doing something else as well. What sort of progress are you making immediately prior to seeking investment? What sort of trajectory is your company on? Is it sort of bumping along the bottom? or is it really growing like at 20 or 30% per month? Because traction will cover for all sorts of different failures in your business. If you're managing to attract people into your business, if you can sell stuff and you're growing rapidly, then that makes it an attractive investment right there, discarding everything else that I've said in this entire talk. If you've got a business that's growing and you're selling stuff, that makes it an attractive investment. If you have a business that isn't growing and is sort of bumping along, then you need all these other things to convince an investor to sell. But out of everything else that I'm talking about, traction is really king. That is the number one thing that's going to attract investors to your business. So what sort of metrics are you using? Are you using pirate metrics to measure your software as a service platform? Eric Ries says the basic unit of progress in a startup is validated learning, not revenue, but validated learning. What are you learning about your marketplace? And your runway is not measured in how many months you have left, but rather the number of iterations that you have left. This is basic lean startup stuff. So what's your learning like? How are you recording that learning? How are you internalizing that and processing it and living the results? Do you have a path to success for the future? Do you have a plan for your product? Do you have a plan to get revenue? Do you have a plan to get into other markets? Do you have a plan to scale in those markets? And really critically, what's your path to the next round of investment? The investment that you're seeking right now, how far is that going to get you? And when that investment runs out, what are you going to do then? Who's the next investor? Is that a Series A investment in California? Are you going to go up to Sand Hill Road and pound the pavement there and try to sell yourself to everyone there? Do you have a couple of strategic investors that might be interested in what you're doing? Do you have other angels in New Zealand who might want to do the next investment round? Are the investors that you're approaching now have sufficiently deep pockets that they'll want to go 2, 3, 4 rounds with you? So be prepared to paint that picture for the investors that you're talking to about how far this money is going to get you and then what happens next. And this should all be summarized in some sort of financial plan. Use of money. Okay, so you're seeking $500,000 of investment. How are you going to spend that? And on what assumptions is that expenditure plan based? And all these other things, but especially for an investor, if I say that I want to get a 30x return, what is that exit going to look like? Who is it that's actually going to buy your company in the end? And real turn-off for investors, and I had this happen to me a couple of months ago, say, oh, actually, we're not going to sell it to anybody. We just want to live off the dividends. And that's exactly what an investor doesn't want to hear. Because, dividends are okay, but what I want to do is make a good amount of money in terms of capital return on each investment I make so that I can then invest in other things as well. A dividend stream doesn't really allow me to do that. So most investors are really after capital gain, and they're looking for an exit point, whether that's usually a trade sale to another company or potentially an IPO. So what's the return on investment that we're likely to get, and how risky is it? And can we turn this into a billion-dollar company? You go to California, talk to VCs over there. If you can't turn your company into a billion-dollar company, well, they're probably not going to be all that interested in talking to you. And
when you say that statement, what timeline? Is that implying a 5-year or 10-year timeline?
Oh, it could be 10 to 15, but chances are if you can't do it in 5 to 7, it's going to be really hard to do it in longer. So, what are the investment terms that you're seeking, particularly valuation? How much is your company worth? And my standard rule of thumb is that if you're pre-product, your company might be worth up to $500,000. If you have a product that's out there in the market in New Zealand and some New Zealand customers, you might be worth up to $1 million. And if you've got customers overseas and you're growing at a reasonable clip, then you're probably worth over $1 million. Now, that's a really, really rough guide, and there are all sorts of things which affect that. But how much do you want to invest? What sort of terms? How big is the board going to be? There's all the sort of fine print that lawyers are going to throw at you, and you're going to have to become a bush lawyer in order to understand all this stuff. And it gets a lot uglier than anyone wants to imagine. And Dave will talk about this, but you will sweat. Unfortunately, the investors are going to sweat too, but it can be unpleasant, but people want to try to make it as nice as possible. And remember that you need to live with these guys after the investment as well. So you need to be sort of careful not to burn bridges. and investors try to do that as well. So in terms of the other investors that you're approaching, other than me, who have you approached? Who haven't you approached? Why haven't you approached them? Are all the investors that are putting money into this round, are they all aligned, or do they all want different stuff? Can we get to the amount of money that you actually need to make this business a success? Because surely there is nothing more frustrating than needing $1 million to take your business to the next stage and only getting $300,000 and trying to do it on a reverse budget. And it's a slow drip feed to death. And we'd all like to try to avoid that. And then, of course, as I mentioned, who's the next investor? So my own concerns, I'm not alone. I don't like investing alone. It's angel investment is a team sport, and I like playing it that way. I'm not a particularly high roller. I do sort of 10s and 20s and the occasional $50,000 investment, but there are other investors who invest a lot more than that. I can get spooked, so I find out that you've lied to somebody about something, and I'm out. And there are any one of a number of things that can cause me to sort of say, okay, I'm not in anymore. So, and I know there are a lot of investors that are like that too. They just see one thing they don't like, and that's not for me. I can get bored, but I get really, really busy. So I've got enough on my plate right now, and if I did another 2 or 3 things, I'd probably go insane really quickly in an ugly way. You have to remember that it's still your company, that you've got all these investors and money coming in and a board and all this. But as a chief exec, do not lose sight of the fact that it's your company, and continually remind your investors that this is my company. And, damn it, I think that, it should be run in a particular way. And if your investors don't like that, then, they'll tell you. But there's nothing I dislike more at a board meeting than talking to a chief exec who just says yes, 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 yes. I want pushback. I know I'm not all that smart, and the CEO who's running the company should be a lot smarter than running the company than me. So I want to get a lot of pushback. It is your company. But for me, the question always comes down to, is it worth the risk? And what sort of value can I add? Because I don't want to invest in stuff that I can't add value to. And then, of course, how much work is it going to be for me? Because I don't want to spend 168 hours working every week, but it seems like, startups are a continual series of near-death experiences, and it always turns out to be more work than anybody wants, including for your investors. So that's about it. I know that was a bit of a whirlwind tour on how to excite me about your company and get me to invest, but there you have it. So I'll leave it at that, and we'll do questions during the panel. So thank you.